Today, so we're talking about leadership in the digital age. Just quick show of hands. How many of you are professionals working within a company? Just quick show of hands, all right. And how many are entrepreneurs? All right, we've got an equal split. Fantastic. So, part of leadership in the digital age is really looking at being adaptable, right? Being flexible, being willing to change with whatever the world throws your way. And so, funnily enough, I'll share a story, because I was thinking about, I always think about how do I want to open when I give a talk, and I thought, what would be a good example of being flexible, of being able to adapt? And you know what's a great example of being flexible and being able to adapt? Losing your luggage. So literally yesterday, after a 12-hour flight of multiple cities from Paris to Vienna to Kiev to here, I landed, but my bags did not make it. So I thought, well, this is going to be a great introduction tomorrow. So I apologize for standing here in a trench coat. Usually not my choice of speaking gear, but thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I found the Lithuanian people to be extremely warm and embracing, and I want to actually give a very special shout out to Monica. Monica, can you just wave? So thank you, because Monica was my volunteer who has been amazing. She showed up this morning, and the women in this room will especially appreciate this, with a straightener to my room and managed to get me ready, and has just gone above and beyond. So thank you so much, Monica. I appreciate it. And I just appreciate the Lithuanian people in general for being so awesome. So, my goal today is as we talk about leadership in the digital age, all of you probably are on a different level when it comes to social media. Some of you probably love it. You're here for a technology conference, so I'm guessing technology enthusiasts. But some of you may not be as familiar as others with it, and that's okay. My goal today is that when you leave here, you understand a little bit better about how to harness the power of technology, the power of the digital age to really further your careers, to further your professional thought leadership, and to help, with whatever future opportunities there may be. So that's my goal today in talking to you about leadership. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself beyond just the losing the luggage, standing here in a red trench coat girl, right, that you might end up remembering once you leave here. But I'll tell you a little bit, because I think the background might be important in terms of why am I here talking about leadership, what makes me eligible to talk about the digital age, if you will. So I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. It's a fairly large school in the state of Texas. And if I had my luggage, I'd be wearing my boots right now, so you'd know I'm from Texas. But they're also in the luggage. Yay! Okay. But graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. I have a master's in organizational communication and technology. And I did my thesis on Twitter when it had about 2,000 users. All right, a far cry from the 375 million it does today. And by the way, for those of you who are wondering, and there's always the few that wonder in the crowd, no, I did not write it in 140 characters. People are always curious. No, didn't write in 140 characters. It was a full-on thesis on social media. It's very exciting. But remember, this was about 8 years ago, when if you really think about social media, technology, the digital age, all of this is still so new. Think about this. 8 years ago, our iPhones didn't exist as we know them today. There was no Instagram. There's no Snapchat. There's no Spotify. You just think about how far we've come in those years alone. So I think technology, as we talk about it, has really come leaps forward in just the last less than a decade, if you will. So we graduated from the University of Texas, and I thought that I would go out there and get a what? What are you supposed to get when you graduate? A job, right? You're supposed to go get a job, except there was one problem when I got out to go get a job. Not only did jobs not exist, but the industry didn't exist. Because 8 years ago, when you said social media, people said, what? And people asked me things like, what's Twitter? right? Or Facebook is something my 13-year-old uses. Remember, this is very, very early days of social media. So this was the start of an industry, the start of an entirely new technology age, if you will. So I had two choices. I guess I could be unemployed or I could be self-employed. Yay! So I decided to be an entrepreneur. I started my own social media digital PR agency, arguably one of the first social media agencies in the world, because it's really easy to be the first when there's not anyone else doing what you're doing. And so, of course, we've come such a long way, but today I'm sharing some of that with you, lessons I've learned academically, but also building my own company. So we've grown to a team of 30. We have clients all over the world, including here in Lithuania. And so we serve a global clientele. So a lot of the lessons I'm sharing with you today, it's not just academic or theoretical. These are very grounded in practical reality, and I'm a big fan of that. When I go to a conference, if I hear a speaker, I want to know, what can I do when I leave? How can I take this and tactically apply it to myself? So my goal is to give you some of that today, right? And so before we dive a little bit deeper into how you can build your profile as a thought leader and why that's important, let's just look at what the age of social media means and influence. What does that even mean? So I would urge you, as you go to the conference today and as you move forward in your professional lives, to not think about social media as you may have. Because quick show of hands, how many of you think of things like Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram when you think social media or LinkedIn? Right? The majority of us, and that's totally fair, totally fair. Thanks for participating, by the way. But I would urge you to think about it a little bit differently. If you think about social media not just as platforms where people connect, but this idea that people are now the media. People are now the media. So how do you take advantage of that? How do you leverage that? And that's really what I would like you to think about as you think about what it means to be a leader in the digital age. Because by the way, you all being here at a conference on a Thursday, it is a Thursday, right? Okay, just checking. All right, been through so many time zones. But just you being here on a Thursday shows that you are committed to your professions, right? That you are committed to growing your career, to making a difference in the world, whatever that may be, whatever that looks like for you. So that tells me you're already a leader. So this is just about how do you amplify that leadership in the digital age? How do you position yourself so you are attracting opportunities to yourself rather than always sort of chasing them, if you will. And so a big part of social is this idea that people are the media. And what I mean by that is, think about the last time you went out and you tried a restaurant. How many have looked at restaurant reviews before trying a new restaurant? Almost all of us, right? How many have looked up movie reviews before deciding what you want to go see? Of course. So if you look around, that is social media. That is people being the media. This is how we make decisions now, right? What to consume, what to shop for, who to hire, which companies we actually go after. All these things essentially end up being pretty crucial. And so one of the favorite things, and I won't play this video for you, but I think it's so telling, a big part of what's driving these changes, right, and this sort of higher bar for leadership to be more transparent is millennials. And millennials are anyone between 18 to 36. It's a pretty broad range. How many are millennials in this audience, by the way? All right? How many wish that I would stop referring to you as millennials? All right, a big chunk. So I'm a millennial too. I just have an interesting perspective because I hire millennials now. We work with clients who are looking to manage and market to millennials. So all sorts of things. I'm rather familiar now with millennials and that mindset. So it's nice to be able to see it from every perspective. But I particularly love this video. And again, I won't play it for you right now. You can look at it later. But I love the idea that this little 2-year-old, who is adorable, thinks that that magazine is a broken iPad. Okay? Let that sink in for a second, because I don't know about you, but anytime I pick up my device, my smartphone or my computer, I'm excited. I think it's pretty neat. There's a part of me that thinks, this is cool. I like being able to connect with people anywhere within minutes. I just think it's neat. But there's a whole generation for which that is the default. I feel like pediatricians, doctors for kids are going to update their charts and say, oh, they're 6 months old now. Are they swiping yet? Right? Because it just becomes so fundamental. If you've seen kids these days, they know how to swipe. Have you noticed this? Like, technology seems so natural to them compared to a lot of us, where I think we sort of had to learn that. But so I love this because this girl knows how to work the iPad so well. She's 2 years old. She moves everything around. Her mom gives her the magazine, and she's confused. The pictures don't move, right? Nothing's happening. She flips it over, and she goes as far, because she's 2 years old, she tests her finger on the palm of her other hand to make sure it's still working. Right? Imagine that, an entire generation that would first think their anatomy had given out, then maybe the technology was broken. And I think that's really telling, and of course it's sort of an extreme example to be able to share with you, but I think it showcases what the expectations are for us as professionals, as entrepreneurs, as people who are really driving, right, the innovators in technology in so many ways. And I particularly love this picture because I feel like if I could sum up the entire presentation into one picture, it might look like that. That's St. Petersburg Square, 7 years apart, and I haven't updated it yet because I figured by next year we'll all have Snapchat glasses, and I'll just wait. So then I'll do the 2017 in Snapchat glasses. But if you look at that, the thing that probably stands out to you is the devices, right? Look at the devices. Of course, that's the first thing. But think a little bit deeper and think about what that means. Because what that means is the reach of that event in 2005 was maybe a few thousand people, 5,000, 6,000 people. What is the reach of that same event 7 years later? Massive, right? Millions of people. Even login, think about all the things that you're learning here today. And I know this is logins, for the last 2 years, you guys have been doing, the conference is amazing, by the way, so congrats to the organizers for putting this together. But login has such a great digital footprint now. People in the States have been asking me about it. I don't think that was really possible a decade ago. Not for in a few years for something to grow so rapidly that people all over the world know about it. And here's the perfect example. Raise your hand if you don't know what happened on a recent United flight. Exactly. Right? So if you really think about it, think about, the United incident that happened recently where a doctor was pulled off board and people took footage and it went viral. I mean, think about it. All of you guys here sort of know what incident took place, but really only 5 or 6 people were privy to that, right? For that particular incident. But think about how that spread and how fast and how, literally overnight, the company lost $800 million. And so if you think about the power of technology that you have today, it's astounding. Never in the history have we had so much power to communicate, to affect change, and on a macro level, right? On a micro level, when it comes to your careers, when you really look at how you are influencing your world, the same thing applies. So a little more on millennials, just because I think there's, again, they're a big driving force for a lot of this technology, for a lot of this social change, for leadership. This is the most educated generation in history, which some of you may know. But did you also know that millennials are richer than Gen X? How many Gen Xers are disappointed right now? Another thing the millennials took from you, right? But 14% of millennials have a net worth of over $2 million. I think that's about like 1.5 million euros, just estimating at this point. And of course, they're the most socially savvy generation, and I don't just mean technology-wise, but philanthropy is very important. Social consciousness, having a mission, being able to give back, all these things are really driving millennials forward because a big shift has occurred, and that shift is that yesterday's corner office has shifted. And what I mean by that is the first impression someone had of a company, of someone had of you, was a meeting, right? And it used to be that the more exclusive a leader, the harder they were to get in touch with. Would you agree? Right? Harder, the more, if you had to go through 4 secretaries, you knew someone was important. But today, because of millennials, because of technology, because of so much of the change that's occurred, it's more about how accessible someone is. When you have presidents and prime ministers who tweet you back, right? It's the direct access that makes leadership leadership. It's no longer that exclusive plane. Or if you think about, the corner office, it always used to be glorified with, who got the corner office, the glass windows, the secretary outside. But today, that impression occurs long before someone ever even meets you, meets your company. And where does that happen? Online, right? Google. People already have a sense of who you are, of what the company does. People already have an impression. So your digital footprint matters more than ever. So what is a digital footprint? It's content that can be traced back to an individual or an organization. And all of you in this room right now have a digital footprint, whether you like it or not, right? The only question is, do you get to curate that? Do you help to guide that? Because you can't control it. Just by virtue of living in this world today, you have a digital footprint. But the opportunity is that you can take that digital footprint and make it one that works in your favor to attract future jobs, board positions, other opportunities that you may not even have dreamt of. Part of me speaking here and being invited to conferences like this to keynote and share my experiences comes from the fact that I've spent a lot of time curating a digital profile for myself, a strong digital footprint. And when I first started, my digital footprint was pretty weak. It included a poem I'd written when I was 14 years old about star power, girl power. Not proud of that one, but that was one of the first search results that came up on Google when you put my name in. And it probably still does, except it's now buried to page 53 last I checked. And I just share this with you because that digital footprint attracts opportunities that you might not have even thought were out there, that were possible. Think about LinkedIn and what a great tool that is. Very recently, I was working on a project, and we needed a structural engineer for this project. And I didn't happen to know any structural engineers at the top of my head, so I went on LinkedIn to research and to see who was out there that I could send a message to who might be interested on working on the project. I can promise you that I don't think someone putting up the profile ever thought that the CEO of a marketing agency would be contacting them for a project like that, right? But the world works in somewhat mysterious ways. And this is just another example. This is a survey from AVG, this was actually a while ago, found that 81% of kids under the age of 2 already have some sort of digital footprint. In the last few years, that number has jumped up to 91%. Under the age of 2, imagine that, right? Because kids today, it's funny, one of the trends I see on Facebook today is parents post up sonogram pictures, right, before the kid is even born. And I find that fascinating because now kids have a digital footprint before they're born. All sorts of ramifications, of course, as we think about that. But that means you as professionals already have that digital footprint, right? Information that someone can find about you, learn about you. The idea is, how do you manage this in a way that helps you get closer to your goals? So 3 very specific things I would like to share with you that you can do to help cultivate your footprint in the digital age. The first thing you can do is develop social literacy skills. And what do I mean by social literacy skills? Here's what I mean. On a lot of resumes that we still get, and we have hire employees, people say proficient at Microsoft Word, which, by the way, at this point, you really should stop putting on your resumes. Just FYI, right? Because it's understood, like, yes, I hope that you are computer literate, right? In the technology space especially. But there's a whole new level of literacy that's rising, and it's, are you socially literate? Are you digitally literate? And that doesn't just mean, do you know how to use a smartphone or use, Excel or be able to, do Facebook Live? It means, do you know how to use these tools to help you get closer to your goals? Are you strategic in the way that you are using these tools? So social literacy is a whole new form of literacy that I think in the next 5-10 years, we're going to start seeing this incorporated, companies asking for this, expecting it, requiring it, but also, this is what I find fascinating, schools teaching it. It's funny, we have, from an education perspective, we teach kids math and reading and writing and science, but it's amazing that we don't teach them digital literacy. We don't, we think they know how to use Snapchat, so they know how to use technology, but that doesn't mean they know how to use it correctly. And there's a difference, right, in how you use technology and using technology correctly. So I'll share a couple of components for social literacy, both on a personal level and on an organizational level. And I'll give you examples of all. So on a personal level, right, it's about being there's a few ways to do this. It's a few ways to create that thought leadership. One is to create your own content, to share your own opinion, being a content creator. Whether that's in the form of a tweet, an update, an article, a podcast, a video, it's creating content, things that you are passionate about, that you know about. The other is to be a curator, where you don't necessarily have to create content out of your mind, right, fresh content, but you're curating, you're being an intelligent filter in your field. You're taking noise and creating wisdom for your audience. And then the other is a connector. Are you using social media to make those connections between other people, those introductions, which, by the way, logins are a great place for you to test some of these things out in terms of how can you, the things that you're learning today, how can you share them with a broader audience? How can you make those connections not just face-to-face, but continue them onwards? So here's a couple of examples. Sally Krawcheck is a CEO, and she posts on LinkedIn pretty regularly. Look at that, 1.6 million followers on LinkedIn. And because her company, Elvest, is about financial literacy for women, she writes a lot about financial literacy. And so, how to get a raise, big ideas for 2017, what's feminism have to do with finances, things like that. But her methodology has been to really create good content that appeals to her audience. And this is the thing, you don't have to be an entrepreneur to have an audience. You all automatically have an audience, right? If you're on Facebook, if you're on social media, you've cultivated a following. Leaders in today's age, they attract followers. And I don't mean in the sense of someone following, wanting to be just like you or following everything you do. I'm talking about looking at you as an expert in your field. And that can be at many levels, regardless of whether you're the CEO or whether you are working up the career ladder or whether you're just getting started. That really doesn't matter. Here's another example. Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, he takes a more curation approach, all right? So he doesn't tweet a lot of fresh content, but he curates. He retweets people talking about Microsoft. He gives kudos to other professionals. He uses his channels to curate content. Pinterest, of course, one of the fastest growing social networking sites, and the reason it's doing so well is because curation today has become so important. How many of you would say that you're inundated with information on a regular basis? All of us, right? All of us are inundated with information on a regular basis. It's overwhelming, but we still need information, don't we? So how do you differentiate between being overloaded with information, still needing information, and that the middle part, the missing link, is relevance, it's context, it's filters? How many would like it if I told you where you could get a free beer after this talk? All of us, right? Yeah, of course. Please point me to there's no free beer, by the way. It's just an analogy for those who got temporarily excited. All right, there's no free beer that I know of, but that would be useful information if I shared that with you right now. Let's say you go home, right? You go back to your workplaces. You go back 2 weeks later. I'm telling you where to get a free beer around here. Is that information still helpful? No, it's spam, unless you work around here, in which case that analogy doesn't quite apply. But once you've gone back to your lives and you're doing the same things, that same piece of information becomes irrelevant. It becomes spam. So relevance, context, all of that becomes very important. Pinterest is a good example because it can help you curate. So even if you don't like creating verbal content, or you're more of a visual thinker, you can even create a Pinterest board for anything that you would like to share that you feel would help. You could take the best of and curate that information for your audience. Instagram works that way too, by the way. Here's another one, Brian Chesky, who's the CEO of Airbnb. He uses Twitter and social media more as a connector. Right? He's not necessarily creating content or curating, but he's making connections. Hey, this company in Silicon Valley is hiring, or you guys, these two people, you should really meet. So he uses that to be a connector. One of the things that I hope that you're taking away from this is it's all about how do you add value, right? How do you add value through your platforms that help distinguish you as a thought leader, as someone that is helpful, as someone that people can look to as knowing what's happening in your field. And that's a big part of leadership in the digital age, is being that filter, being able to take a lot of this information and sharing it in a way that's valuable for people. So at the organizational level, these same principles apply, just slightly differently. Right? So for an organization, one of the most important things today is agility. It's being able to adapt and make decisions quickly. It's aggregation, and by aggregation, I mean taking a lot of information within the organization and from outside the organization, internal and external, and being able to make good decisions based on all that data, and then authenticity. I think this goes back to sort of the millennials and technology, and in the sense that people expect a certain level of transparency from companies. And when it's given, not only is it refreshing, it's expected. And when it's not there, the backlash that we see is absolutely huge. So going back to sort of that United example, right? United Airlines example, the controversy itself, the incident itself was challenging enough, but the response given by the CEO right after is what caused the greatest backlash. Because the way the company responded to that initially was very prosaic, it was very legal, right? It was about not taking responsibility, about trying to explain the situation, when what people really wanted was empathy, was to show that the company cared about its passengers and its customers. So here's a couple of examples. How many use Slack, by the way, now in their teams? Quite a few of you. Yeah, it's a fantastic tool. And so if you're not familiar with Slack, it's like Skype, I would say, but for an internal organization, and so much more. It allows you to communicate, allows you to create multiple groups, share files. But it goes back to being able to make decisions quicker and having less red tape so you can respond to things in real time. Here's an example that I'll share with you that we worked on very recently. It's one of my favorite ones. How many of you are familiar with Dippin' Dots ice cream? Right? Some of you. Okay. So Dippin' Dots it's an American company, but they're all over the world. And it used to be called Ice Cream of the Future. That's not its tagline anymore. But for the purposes of this was actually quite an interesting controversy that happened a few months ago, in that Dippin' Dots is one of our clients. And one of the things that started happening over one particular weekend was that our press secretary in the US, Sean Spicer, who some of you may have seen certain tweets that come out from that White House and so forth, does not like Dippin' Dots. All right, so our press secretary is not a fan of the company and was very verbal about it on social media over the years. And so it started trending. And what started trending was Press Secretary Sean Spicer hates Dippin' Dots. And it started trending on Twitter, on Facebook. And so Monday morning, about 8:30 a.m., we had a meeting with the client, with their traditional PR team, our team, and there was only one response that we knew that was not on the table, right? Only one option that was not on the table. And that option was not responding. Because it wasn't about the media so much as customers who expect a company to respond. So we couldn't just stay quiet, but we needed to address it in a way that was not political, that was still, right, fun in some ways. Ice cream, let's face it, it's a fun thing. The brand is supposed to be lighthearted. So we ended up creating an open letter from Scott, who's the CEO of Dippin' Dots, to Sean Spicer, press secretary. And as you can tell, the letter was very casual. Right? It says, "Dear Sean," first name basis. It's a little funny, it's a little cheeky. It says things like, "I know running out of your favorite ice cream flavor can feel like a national emergency." So a little tongue-in-cheek, a little funny, and we put this letter on the website. Within 48 hours, this campaign had a reach of 1.4 billion. 1.4 billion impressions. Within an hour of this going up, my phone was ringing. We were talking to NPR, to CNN, BBC, all the top sort of news channels in the US, but also globally, who wanted to know how the company had responded. And very quickly, that trending term from Sean Spicer hates Dippin' Dots turned to hashtag we love Dippin' Dots. So as an example of a company that was willing to be transparent, responsive very quickly, because that's the other thing. When something like this happens, and if a company doesn't respond, that speaks volumes too. People don't see silence today as, oh great, it'll just blow over. Right? How this was handled could have been very bad or very good. So this is a counterexample to the United Airlines example, which of course was quite challenging. So for organizations, you have to be willing to respond in a way that's transparent, that showcases the leadership, and that is human. Because sometimes in technology, we miss the human aspect, and we forget that that's really what makes technology so awesome, are the humans behind it. And what it allows us to do is to connect with other human beings. We're looking beyond just the screen names and the Snapchats and so forth. So I started thinking about what it takes to build a personal brand. And by the way, that's one of my articles that I wrote for Forbes. You can check it out later. It was 7 ways to build an awesome personal brand. And one of the things that you can also do is you think about how you create your brand in the digital age is thinking about linking to other organizations and other communities that already have a lot of credibility, if that makes sense. And so what I mean by that is, if the company you work for, the college you went to, the community, by the way, Login here itself is an amazing example of this, is how can you tie your brand into something like that? And what I mean by this is, for a lot of your companies, you probably have blogs, newsletters, right, accounts, but how many of you have ever approached the company to do a guest post on the blog? Or write something for the newsletter, or to showcase your position, or to showcase your perspective from within the company? Yet all these opportunities exist, right? These outlets exist for you. It's just a matter of being proactive in how you use them. So the second tip is stepping into the spotlight. And what I mean by that is one of the things that I hear a lot from professionals especially is, but I don't really know if I have anything to say. Or isn't this already said? How do I was talking to this female engineer, and she said, I'm thinking about writing my perspective, on LinkedIn specifically about kind of stories about, from a perspective of a female engineer, especially in Silicon Valley. And I told her, that's a great idea. Why don't you do that? And she said, I just don't know if it would be valuable. And I said, yeah, absolutely it would be valuable because only you have your perspective, your lens, and that is valuable. And this is the other thing. What you write, what you share, doesn't have to appeal to everyone, right? This isn't about how many people can you get to follow or like or retweet. That's not what I'm talking about. It's how can you get the attention of the right people? How can you build the right core audience? So for her, she doesn't need everybody, reading her information. For her, her goal is to inspire and mentor other young female engineers to come join the, STEM fields, which I think is great. So she's writing for a very specific audience. So stepping into the spotlight is fairly important. Here's just an example of my LinkedIn profile. I started publishing on LinkedIn more recently, and you can look, I have about over 250,000 followers now just on LinkedIn with the content that we share, which is a great audience because my audience tends to be people like you, professionals, people who are interested in marketing, technology, the future. So one of the very simple things that you can do as you leave the conference is even just make sure your LinkedIn is updated. Are you really telling your story, your professional story in a way that people would want to connect with you? What kind of opportunities are you open to? Right? With social, especially with your digital footprint, it's not about just doing it once and leaving it alone, but constantly keeping it updated and making sure that your digital footprint is reflective of where you are in your current career. And by the way, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with all of you guys. Another example, Facebook Live now allows you to have two-people conversations, right? You can go live with another individual. What a great way if you don't necessarily want to create content, but curate content. You could think about the top people in your industry and start interviewing them, right? Creating value for your audience, and it doesn't all have to come from here. It could just be asking good questions, being curious. If you're not comfortable with the camera, no problem. Podcasting is one of the fastest growing mediums right now, right? You have so many options in how you can curate and share information. Here's another example to at an organizational level. So this is one of our Lithuanian clients, Nordcurrent, who's got that very popular gaming app called Cooking Fever that many of you may also be addicted to. And I say also because I am. It's a fantastic game, but one of the things that we've done, and they're a client of ours, what we've done with them is have leveraged influencers on their behalf, right? So here's an example of RCL Beauty, who's a beauty influencer, and there was a video that we worked with them on called the Slime Challenge, and Cooking Fever was integrated into that video. It has over 18 million views. Right? 18 million views. So as an organization, it's not just about stepping into the spotlight for all the leaders, but how you can also leverage other influencers in your field to sometimes get that message out there. So influencer marketing is on the rise, and I believe there's a talk later too on the specific topic. The third thing I would like to share with you is the importance of leaning into feedback. As an individual, as a professional leader, and at the organizational level. And to make this really easy, I've broken it down for you into ETC: education, transparency, and choices. And so education becomes, how do you help your customers, your audience, your bosses, doesn't really matter who you're trying to influence, and let's face it, we're all trying to influence someone, right? Education is a big way to do that. Disclosure is very big. And again, this goes back to some of that millennial thinking where we're not willing to accept just, that's what, it is because it is. the question becomes, why is it that way? We're curious about things, and banks, by the way, are seeing this more than ever because people used to simply accept banking fees. What's happening now is people say, what are these fees for? What am I paying for? I want to understand this better. So banks, financial institutions across the world are having to disclose more information, are having to educate more. And of course, you can do this through so many ways. There's infographics, there's videos, but education ends up being a key component. You know, a big part of leading in the digital age is not about keeping secrets, keeping things hidden, but by being a smart filter, by creating more accessibility for the content. So I'll give you another example. I had a young man come up to me when I was giving a keynote a couple of months ago in Canada, and he came up to me and he said, you know, I've just joined my dad's company, and it's an old business, and I'm really trying to get him to do more marketing stuff and get the word out there, but he's afraid the competition is going to steal our ideas. And that is a very common way of thinking in the past, but what I told him was, well, the good news is the competition already knows your ideas, right? The even better news is you can now start sharing this information with your customers and your potential customers, because for the longest time, the way power worked, and of course, I think with Lithuania and your specific background in history, you understand this, I think, as a people really well, is power was controlled by people who had information. Wasn't that true? Right? If you controlled access to information, you had power, but the internet changed all that for us because now everyone has access. This is how, by the way, the church grew as it did over the years, because it contained how many people could have access to information. But when information becomes ubiquitous, everyone has access, what becomes important isn't so much secrets and who has information. It has who has the right information at the right time and is willing to share that in a way that is better than their competitors. So in today's environment, it's not about, your competitors finding out your secrets, but so much more about out-educating your competitors. If you want to win, you have to out-educate. The other part is transparency. Very important in a culture that I think, the digital culture that demands it. A lot of people worry about people saying something negative about them or their companies or their work online. But here's the beautiful thing. Today, companies are not judged for being perfect or not perfect. In fact, it's understood that most people in companies are not perfect. What consumers are looking for, what audiences are looking for, is how you respond to that. So you can actually get more credibility by responding to something in a way that's honest, the way that's human, in a way that takes responsibility, than for being perfect or never having made that mistake. And Amazon, by the way, has done some really interesting studies on this, because they test products, the same product, one scenario A, has all, 100 positive reviews. Same product, scenario B, has 100 reviews, 80 are positive, 10 are mediocre, and 10 are really, okay, this sucks. Again and again, you find that scenario B sells more product. It sells more product than all perfect reviews. Why? Because it's more believable, it's credible, and it's more about, we don't expect things to be perfect all the time, but we expect people to respond in a way that's professional, that's human, that's courteous, and that's what makes the difference. The other thing that's so important is choices. And by choices, I mean we're so used to that. Look at all the choices we have in every available area today, right? Professional services, personal, transportation. I was just thinking, even where, lodging. You have hotels, you have Airbnbs. We have so many options today. We have choices. But a part of that is we're used to those choices. So as individuals and as companies, we really need to look at how to create those choices that our customers are now used to be able to connect with us. And so here's an example. If you go to my site, if you go to shamahyder.com, you'll find that on the top banner, I give people choices in how they can connect with me. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, doesn't matter. And a lot of that information is similar information. I'm not sharing completely different information on LinkedIn than I am on Facebook and so forth, but it's giving people options of how to connect with you, because we're not a homogenous people anymore. And by that, I mean that how we consume information is really different too. 10 years ago, if you wanted to read a book, you had two choices: paperback or hardback. Okay? Today, look at how many choices we have. Kindle, iPad, right? Podcast. How many of you like to listen to things while you work? A lot of us, right? You have so many ways to consume that same information. So one of the things that you can do as you lead in the digital age is to give people more choices in how they connect with you. Because not only is it great, it's now expected. So as we wrap, one of the things I would urge you to think about as you continue on to the conference, right, is you take some of these principles I've shared with you and dare to think a little differently. And not to think about technology as something you use, or even social media platforms as something, again, to use, but rather think about this new ecosystem that we all live in. It's like the fish that's swimming in water and that says, "Where's the water?" Right? You're surrounded by it. And that really is the power of technology today. And I want to congratulate us as a society and you as a society, because what's amazing is the ability you have today to make an impact in your professional careers, on your community, and the greater world. And that is unmatched. Never before in history has anyone had the opportunity that you do. So I hope that you use that wisely. And thank you again for hosting me today.